Colin, welcome. Could you maybe start with a bit of background about who you are? People think of wilderness, they think of natural selection. Can you give us all a bit of an intro?
Sure, Ferran. For your coffee's cold if you want me as the first interviewee. I should have been number 99. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity, Ron. Appreciate it. I was one of the lucky guys, and my very first job was in the Okavango Delta as a 23-year-old. Came straight out of university, and it was 1976. I went to Wits, did a degree in economics, which I hated. When I did Economics 101, on my first lecture, I thought, oops. When the second lecture was Law 101, I went, oops, oops. And my third lecture was Accounting 101, which was terrible. Anyway, I stuck it out. And then the 76 riots came. And Joburg in South Africa was a horrible place. And I was offered two jobs. One was a safari guide in Botswana with no money, but the potential for lots of fun. And the other was to go and work in what was Southwest Africa as a geologist. So to get through university, I did all these other courses to keep me alive. And I literally, both companies had their head offices in Main Street in downtown Johannesburg. And I spun a coin because I didn't know cash in what's now Namibia or fun in Botswana. And I spun a coin and it came up to Botswana. So off I went, got my guide's license in April 77. And I found myself in the Okavango Delta. My friends from university said, "Where is that? What's the Okavango Delta?" It was one of those just lucky things. And so we worked for a South African company in the Delta. And we could see all the money was staying in South Africa. There were no jobs being created in Botswana. And the next year, 78, I met my partner to be, Chris McIntyre. Still, I rate the finest guide ever to be around. I mean, he's just one of these extraordinary, larger-than-life characters. Honest, powerful, strong characters, fun. And we saw that the writing was on the wall. The Bush War was going on in Rhodesia. You'll know that well from that time. And the winds of change were coming through. And we said to our boss in about 81, 82, we said, "You've got to go and set up a company in Botswana." And he said, "Not a chance. The Okavango has had its best days. There is going to be no future. The best days are behind us. And I'll never set up a business." We said, "Listen, but the money is going to Joburg. We're paying 2 pula, which is what today, 3 rand a day for the park fees." And we were creating no jobs. We said, "Listen, we will set up a company and we'll go and live in Mao. And you can pay us 750 rand. And we'll just keep the salary increasing by CPIX, and we'll set it up for you." He said, "It'll fail. We'll never do it," and all the rest. Eventually, we pulled we called his bluff. And Chris and I moved up in 83. We set up Wilderness Safaris, and we had no cash. We had saved up each 2,500 rand, and we set up this business. And what we learned in those early days is to partner. And that was kind of like the genesis. And we started to partner with local communities, particularly once we started to expand. We went to Namibia and into Zim. And this partnership thing really started to gather wings and wheels. And some of those sort of early partnerships, I mean, the ones in Namibia we started, Garth Owen Smith kind of really inspired us, and we went over there and we partnered with communities out there. And those early camps are still running today, and they form the basis of what is now 35% of Namibia is all these private conservancies in partnership with local communities. It's an extraordinary kind of success, which we stumbled into by accident. And we didn't have a blueprint. We didn't have a way to kind of go and refer to the books because it was uncharted territory. And because of our work with communities, and the one thing we learned is that there was no one recipe. Every single partnership had to be tailor-made for that particular community. But we did know that there were only so many sweeties on the table, and you had to share those sweeties fairly. And if we shared them fairly, then there was longevity. So in about moving on to Mkombati, I had gone down to Mkombati in the 80s with the most beautiful girl. My goodness. So I fell in love with Mkombati from 2 angles. But she was a fantastic horse rider, and they had those Ponda ponies. So on our first day there, she says, "Off we go." And I'd never ridden a bloody horse in my life, coming from the Kalahari in Botswana, and off we charged around Mkombati. Fell in love with it, but I was so buggered from the horse ride that nothing happened, that she ditched me. Anyway, fast forward to 2002, and we get a call. The communities is looking out for people who have worked with communities before elsewhere in Africa to come and see what could happen. And what had happened in Mkombati, you've got to go back to 1920. The government of the colonial government of the time had a leprosy colony on Robben Island. And they had dreams and aspirations to find a better situation for the leprosy colony. It was too moist, it was unhealthy. They had other dreams for what was going to happen to Robben Island, which we know all about. So they went around South Africa looking for the place with the most benign climate, with lots of space, not too many people. They went into the Karoo, but too hot in summer, too cold in winter, etc., etc. And they came across Mkombati, and they said, this is the perfect place to set up a leprosy colony. They cleared 18,000 hectares, brought in the trucks, moved every single person out and dumped them in the interior. And in the new South Africa, if you were thrown off your land after 1913, when the Draconian Land Act came into place, you could then claim to get your land back. And the community got together, a handful of original ancestors, the generations of the ancestors who were thrown off the land, got together, and the government said, no, 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 it has to be a broad-based community. There are a lot more people than a handful of you folks who were thrown off the land. Go and create a really broad-based trust representing the people of the area, so that we have a big net to encompass all the folks whose ancestors were thrown off the land. And that's what they did. They created the Mkombati Land Trust in 2000. And in 2002, the land was formally signed off by the government, and Mkombati changed from government state land in the Department of Agriculture through to being privately owned by the people who live inside the land. So 40,000 people created this trust. Mkombati Land Trust represents 40,000 people, some of the poorest people in South Africa. You know, a lot of the people who live along the coast, along the Wild Coast, they've had people walking through homestays, selling the little bits of trinkets here and there, and working as guides, etc., etc. Our community in the inland have never had tourism. They are some of the poorest folks around. Even the chief we have to deal with has got no running water, and has only recently got electricity. So the poorest folks now own Mkombati as the reserve through their trust. 40,000 folks are the direct beneficiaries. And that was 2002. It was awarded. It was formally handed over in 2004. And we were asked to come in as wilderness safaris in 2002. Anyway, the whole process the Eastern Cape government was suddenly found that they had to relinquish their crown jewels. And Mkombati and the Great Fish are probably their two finest reserves. And here they were losing their crown jewels. And they had 2 years of negotiation with the trust. And they worked out a cooperative agreement between them, where the ECPTA would do the management and the conservation, and then the community would own the land, and they would then go and leave it out there for tourism. And they tried a concession, and Adrian Gardner got involved, we got involved, and all the rest of it. But there was just so much paperwork and so much sort of angst from the government because they were giving out their crown jewels that nothing happened. Fast forward to 2012, we get a call from the community, and they said, "Colin, can you get involved?" And I said, "No, I've retired. There's no ways I want to get involved with tourism again." So they said, "Just let me shut up."
For everyone listening, I saw a hand going up. I just want to say there will be a Q&A session afterwards. So please keep your questions for the end. Thank you. Carry on, Colin.
So 2012, we got this call, and the chairman of the trust phoned me. He said, "Colin, please get involved." And I said, "No, we've retired." And I said, "I'll help you. I'll make sure that you find the right investor," and off you go. Because what had happened between 2002 and then 2004, and then is that they had self-drive tourism, they had self-catering tourism, and they created 3 jobs and no money. So they owned the land, and they'd given it over to conservation, but they got no money and no jobs. So something had to change. Either they have to take it back, move in with their livestock, their goats and villages and all the rest of it, or they had to change. And what had happened is sandparks in South Africa had mirrored the Botswana process. And sandparks had gone out way in the 90s. They realized that government didn't have money for conservation and they had to have a brand new sort of funding model. And sandparks went out and they did the concessioning of their restaurants and the Singitas, all those pieces of land, Jock Safari Lodge, the Moors, all those type of lodges were all concessioned out so that sandparks could create revenue streams way beyond what government can do. If you look at today, sandparks, they get a budget, their total costings, I think they spend something like 4 billion a year, and less than a quarter of that comes from government. The rest of it comes from these concessioning agreements and from park fees, et cetera, et cetera. So sand parks have only got 3 profitable parks, Addo near you, Table Mountain and Kruger, and they fund the rest of the 20-something odd lodges through this concessioning process. So, but down there, nothing was happening. The poorer folks who owned the land, 3 cleaning jobs and no money. And they looked at the concessioning models, they looked at what had happened in Botswana and sandparks, and they said, aha. So they put it out to public tender. We went down, we fell in love with the area again. We tendered, we won the rights for a concession inside Mkombati, not the whole reserve, just the northern concession, along the lines of what had happened in sandparks. And the key thing is they started off, they had some transactional advisors that not really experienced in tourism, but the community wanted a 300-bedded facility because they thought more jobs, more beds, more tourists, more jobs, more money. And we said, whoa, hang on a moment. Let's have a look at the Margate hotels, which have got 300 beds and some of them 30, 40 jobs. And we gave them the Botswana model, which we were very familiar with. We said, okay, this is what a 5-star 12-room lodge in Botswana will produce as far as jobs, well over 100. And the money which a high-end facility can provide is considerably more than a massive big hotel. And we had this big debate. How do we get the model right between numbers and jobs and revenue? And eventually they agreed with the Botswana model, the sandparks model. Lower number of tourists, charging a higher amount of jobs, of money, which would then create, sort of translate into higher demands from the tourists, for higher service levels, which would create more jobs. And that's what we settled on. So there's the public area of Mkombati in the south, there's the private concession up in the north, and we had to come in and create a tourism model which would create training for the local folks. Because remember, when you live in the inland, there's no jobs. 99% of our folks have never really had any formal training, formal experience. They came straight out of the villages. We work with a trust. They have an employment committee. We say, right, we need X number of people, and they provide the folks. And then we sift it through and we work out the folks who've got the biggest smiles, and we employ for attitude, and then we train for whatever skills. And that kind of Sandparks Botswana model has now been applied there. So that's kind of where we are right now. If we don't perform, there's a lot riding on this project. I think if you step back into the big picture again, the whole story of where South Africa is that we've see that the national parks are fine, but our provincial parks are in dire straits. And where Mkombati sits it's almost like the litmus test to see if we can get a model in South Africa which works for provincial reserves. EWT, Endangered Wildlife Trust, brought Dr. Ian Little in a year or 2 back, and he did a study of all the provincial parks. They went into depth into 3. They didn't have the time or the money to do all 9 provinces. But they did a study and they found that each and every single one of the provincial parks in South Africa is bankrupt. So we've got a dire situation in South Africa where our conservation authorities do not have enough money. Because, frankly, conservation doesn't create votes. If you're sitting in government and you want to get votes, housing, health, all the rest of it does it, but conservation doesn't create votes. So when there's fees must fall, what gets plundered? It's the conservation budget. So our provincial parks are completely and absolutely underfunded. There's something like, I think right now, about 80% of most of the provincial parks budget goes on salaries. Right now in Eastern Cape, there is no money for people to go out and travel to do their work. Meetings have been stopped. They just are not have the budget to go and do the necessary works. So Cape Nature was the first to start this concessioning story. They've got De Hoop, which you've been to, you know about, and Eastern Cape has now followed this. And the first example of a partnership, a genuine partnership between government and the private sector is now at Mkombati. The biggest advantage is we've now got the third level of the pot, which is the community. So we've got government, we've got private sector, and most importantly, we've got the community in a partnership. And Mkombati is kind of like where everybody's in government is looking to see if this model is the way forward to help fund and make our provincial parks become viable. As you know, in places like KZN, we've got rhino poaching off the charts and all the rest of it. Simply, we don't have the money to adequately manage and fund these parks. So where Mkombati sits in the global picture in South Africa is we've got to get this model right between government, private sector, conservation, and with the private sector providing the glue between all of them to make them work. And if we fail, yep.
Out of interest there, lots of questions. You've answered a lot of them and a lot of new ones pop up. But do you have people in government that you feel are watching to see if you succeed and will do what's necessary? Are there people that are well placed that do give you hope that you can take this model forward? And could you maybe touch on what that might look like, the future, should this work?
Well, Mkombati's been on the Asgisa. The government years ago created the Asgisa, which is like the ocean's economy. Mkombati was on the cabinet's desk. It was the tourism arm which they fast tracked to make sure happened, because they do need examples of success. And now that we've seen Sandparks really does work when it comes to the funding, what's next? So Cape Nature, they haven't got themselves out of the wood yet because they don't have enough in the private sector, but they've started. And De Hoop is now a great success. De Hoop is working, not as much as it should be because they still don't have enough money for all the alien clearing and all the rest of it, but it's still a viable model. Just needs to develop some scale. But this is certainly on the cabinet's desk to watch and to make sure and encourage to make sure it comes to fruition. So we've had a whole lot of detractors, Ron. I mean, my goodness, you can't believe the errors we've had from folks who've been going to Mkombati for 30 years and saying, you know what, where do I go and cook my boerewors? And we said, no, you can go, the cottages are available in the south. You can go and stay there. You can still pay your couple of $100 and you can go and do your own cooking. But we do need to make this viable, mainly for the community's sake. If the community is on side, and where this goes, is that in the N2 offset program, the N2 highway was this big highway which is planned to go connect Durban to East London. And avoid a lot of the ups and downs and in and outs and all the rest of it. So SANRAL's got this program, and part of that offset was the potential creation of 9 new reserves or community conservancies to preserve all the key habitats all the way down the Wild Coast. So 9 of these, they call them the 9 polygons. Those are now waiting to happen. And Mkombati is the first domino. And once Mkombati is seen as a success and the community is genuinely getting upliftment at a broad scale, then these other communities will come on sides. So we're desperately waiting for the funding to help these 9 polygons, but the example. So not only on a national level, but also regionally, if we can get 9 new reserves created all the way down the Wild Coast in partnership with communities, then we've got one of the global hotspots now adequately protected. The problem we've got, let's step back on the hotspot theory, Ron. If we conserve the right 5-6% of the planet, we can conserve as a species, 80% of all the biodiversity on this planet. 80%, if you could go and identify the correct 5-6%. One of those hotspots is the Pondo Center of Endemism. That's around us. And the only protected area in this entire Pondo Center of Endemism with 2,200 species is Mkombati. We need more protected areas. And we also need Mkombati to be increased in size. So part of this whole program is that once Mkombati is up and running, and once the money starts to flow and the jobs start to flow at scale, remember we've only just been open a year, once we've got it at scale, the plan is to almost double the size of Mkombati. The community will add more land they've got outside the reserve, which is uninhabited. They'll add that into the reserve. But it's got to be viable for the community as a whole. Once we've got that, and we've got the community on sides, other communities down the Wild Coast will see that, and these 9 polygons can be converted into conservancies. So there's a hell of a lot riding, not only on the provincial level, at South African level, but in the Wild Coast. Everything hinges on Mkombati. And when I have these oaks phoning up saying, listen, you're charging a park fee of 300 Rand and you're charging South Africans 3,900 Rand to stay, what about me? I've been going there for 30 years and I deserve to be able to keep going. I keep saying, hang on, mate, this is not your land. This is not taxpayers' land. This is private land. And if the owners of the land do not get benefits from their land, and if conservation doesn't benefit, then you actually might as well bring in the goats and the livestock and forget about it. And we've seen that in South Africa. We've got Ndumu Game Reserve, which is right up against the Mozambique border, in my view, and many conservation views, was the finest, most wild park in South Africa. For me, I think Ndumu in the old days and the Makuleki area up in the northern part of Kruger are just unbelievable areas. But they are growing millies within 1 kilometer of Nyamiti Pan inside Ndumu. Why? Because the local communities were not involved and consulted. It's happened now, but it's bolted. So we've got one chance to get this thing right. And when folks say to me, well, what about me? It's not about me, it's about we. And it's about we as a country, it's about we as a species, it's about we at climate change, and most importantly, about the community taking direct ownership and then benefiting from that ownership. And I think that's where we get.
I want to come in there. I think in terms of the tourism industry, and certainly from GweGwe's point of view, and with Dave listening in there, we often highlight the sort of wonders of travel, the stuff you see on the surface, beautiful accommodation, beautiful beaches, and we'll find that pushback, particularly from South Africans on rates. And we've certainly made an effort, and I think we all need to sort of highlight more the job creation. I often think of what tourism means in South Africa, and I'll say, I think it's where the Rainbow Nation lives and Ubuntu thrives. And, people are looking at in the mirror, but it's creating important jobs. And then beyond there, the conservation story, people will think about the conservation fee, and then that's that. But to tie it in, when we were there, I mean, you've got a great team, and we'll come back into that in a bit. I just want to share Aquaman. You've got Aquaman, Asunda, the man who found my watch, which is on charge here now.
Yay!
I jumped in. We'll come to that. But what I wanted to say on this point, I was interviewing them, very short interviews with some of your team, and Asunda said, I asked him what GweGwe meant to him, and he said, it's given me the ability to dream. And I think I'd mentioned this to you. And all of a sudden, the comfy pillows, which are great, the beautiful scenery, and that was like, wow, this is real life. This is conservation and community. And I think we as an industry need to tell that story more too, in terms of when you stay, you are contributing to society. That's something that I wanted to bring in there and, find out how you are finding the people who are working there, how are they responding to GweGwe Beach Lodge just 1 year in?
No, it's been an incredible journey. So our landowners are the direct beneficiary. Everything we do is inland. We have to be inland because the folks up the coast and down the coast, they've already had tourism forever and they're getting the benefits and they've got the rights to do their own thing. So we focus on the folks in the interior. And it's a case of the extraordinary joy. We had a lady, how's this? We were checking out some guests. I was standing next to the manager at the time, and this lady came streaming up and grabbed him and said, "Listen, come. We were at the car park saying goodbye." And we said, "No. We're saying goodbye." She said, "No, come." And she hauled Corrie off. And and I looked over my shoulder, and 20 yards away, there's chuck. And oh my goodness, something's happened. What's going on here? And Corrie came back and he had a tear in his eye. And I said, "What happened?" She had just started with us and we were teaching her coffee. You know, what's a latte and what's a cappuccino and this and this and this and this is how you do it. Chuk. And she went up to Corrie and she said, "You know what? I had the finest day of my life." And Corrie said, "What? You just arrived. You're just training." She said, "I tasted coffee for the first time in my life." Now,
Yeah.
I mean, that's the level of poverty. Now, you take a person who's never had a job. And the beauty of these Pondo people are, my goodness, have they got heart? Have they got the genuine warmth? And you saw that. I mean, these folks are just off the charts. They've just got it naturally. So all we got to do is give them the skills and give them the tools. And these folks are just naturals in the hospitality industry. And it's that kind of joy when you're taking people who've had nothing and you say, the chief with no running water, and you're now giving them all the tools so they can have a proper life. As you saw with Asanda, it gives them dreams. I mean, that guy is now earning a proper salary. He's earning incredible tips. He's got an opportunity to now, not only for himself, but his entire village. Remember the sort of ratio between a person who's employed and earning a salary and the dependents is something like 14, 15 to 1. So you're getting not only just him or her, because most of our staff are women there. We're something like 85% women, which we're very proud of. And by the way, that's been the game changer. Wow, these women are just superb. But every person employed, there's 15 other people out there who are benefiting directly. And, they call it the black tax. When somebody is out there and then they have to share their earnings with all their relatives and all the rest of it, because there's nothing else. And, the biggest form of employment for our folks inland is actually, people, migrant labor, sending back cash. So we need to create the local economies. And part of our story is now, how do we get organic veggies grown in the communities? How do we get all the services coming in from the local communities? It's early days, and we have to start that. And that's where it comes down to Asanda and creating the dream, because the dream can happen because the Wild Coast is just extraordinary. And it's a case of how do you leave a tourism in such a way that it's not just a cottage where the chief gets a bottle of Klipdrift at Christmas, that there's genuine value coming through into the area. And the one thing about South Africans is that we've had it so cheap, so easy for so long, we kind of assume this is our right. Those days are gone. We have to now make sure that there's money going back into conservation for biodiversity and into communities. And we've caught so much flack because we charge a park fee. It used to be 28 Rand to go into Mkombati. We charge 300 Rand for South Africans, 800 Rand for foreigners. And you know what? And all our business throughout natural selection, we run 26 different lodges. We control 1 million hectares of land, which we manage directly. We separate, and it was one of the kind of demands out of COVID. We had the accommodation portion, and you have your conservation and park fee portion. And we always get guests wanting, they've got a better deal on accommodation, but nobody ever gives us grief on the conservation portion, because that's what people expect. But when South Africans start to not want to pay a simple park fee of 300 Rand, and it doesn't go to us, it goes to the Mkombati NPO. It goes to that so that it can do the conservation work. We're starting the Mkombati version of the Black Mambas. So the Black Mambas are probably the single most extraordinary anti-poaching team in South Africa, where they've taken rhino poaching from catastrophic in their area to zero. I mean, it's been a decade of no rhino poaching. Why? Because the women do it, and they're unarmed. The women are out in the communities and in the reserve. They understand what's going on long before the poachers really arrive. They've already sorted it out. They've got the intel, and we're replicating them, and we're unashamedly cribbing them. And Craig Spencer, who's the founder and he drives the Black Bombers, invited us. We went and spent a week with them, and he's shared all his knowledge. And we're starting the Mkombati Green Griffins, which is our all-women team of anti-poachers, monitors, and all the rest of it, based solely on the experiences of the Black Mambas. And it's that type of initiative where that's more people employed. But that's going to be funded somehow. And we fund that through our park fee. And it's a simple thing. South Africans have to accept that states are never going to do it. If we continue down this line as South Africans, assuming that we've got the right to walk in and pay nothing, it's gone. Our provincial parks will be over. And we have to have a mindset change to make sure that conservation is first, because without biodiversity, we're finished. So we got to really protect our biodiversity. And tourism, we learned through COVID that the only viable and long-term sustainable form of funding is tourism. But we do need a park fee. And that's what happens throughout the world. Nobody complains about it, except South Africans who want to go and walk through and pay nothing.
And we've got so many places that are, that are still in need of getting to where you are that we can explore. So we've got to accept, and I think we've got the job of educating people about the importance of what those park fees mean. But Colin, before I get into the nuts and bolts of staying and visiting and getting there, just a few quick questions. Ponderland versus Wild Coast. Can you tell anybody who doesn't know what's Ponderland, what's Wild Coast?
So Wild Coast is that entire stretch from the south of the Kai all the way up to where the KZN border is, literally from from one end to the other. Where Ponderland is a section sandwiched between the Xhosas and the Zulus. And the Ponders go back to, I think they first walked in the year 800. But they really came to the fore with King Faku. King Faku is this legendary king, and he's the one. Shaka annihilated and sorted out everybody except for King Faku. Shaka came for King Faku, and what he did, he took all these people, got them across the other side of Umgazi, where you are, and he hid away. And he had these sniper attacks. He invented guerrilla tactics, and Shaka suddenly met his match, to the extent that they ended up. Shaka sent King Faku 100 head of cattle, and Faku sent Shaka 100 head of cattle, kind of like a mutual acknowledgement of each other. So it's a group of people. So Ponderland is where the Pondo settled. Zulus to the north, Xhosas and all the rest to the south, and it's that section of land almost from Ngazi all the way up to the KZN boundary. That's Ponderland. It's got kind of Ponderland East and Ponderland West, and that goes back to different kings and all the rest. But it's that incredible stretch of land within the Wild Coast.
Yeah, and then just to let people know a bit about the visit from a traveler's point of view, we went down, we stayed in South Brum the first night to sort of prepare. We didn't know what the road trip would be like ahead. We were very pleasantly surprised by South Brum, Pennington, tidy towns. Really, a lot of the negativity we heard wasn't there. And it was great to start there. And then it took us about 4.5 hours to get down to GweGwe Beach Lodge. What was interesting is people imagining giant potholes, and it wasn't the case. The road was good. There's just a lot of speed bumps to slow people down. And we had the rural five, the donkeys and the goats and the sheeps and all the things that make traveling in Africa, real. And it was cool scenery to take in. So the road condition, we didn't expect it to be as good. That was the first part. And then getting in, just getting there and thinking, wow, you've got to get these services, you've got to get food down here, you've got to train people. That's a massive commitment. So, Colin, 20 odd years for you to get to this point where you've got this beautiful offering. I mean, what kept that fire going? Because I've got some guesses, but can you tell us what kept that fire going? I think you've answered us already in terms of the relevance, but could you just touch on that for us quickly?
No, it was more than that, Ron. Way back, they had the Umkomathi Land Trust had this fantastic chairman. And we had a whole lot of paperwork issues. Remember, this has never happened before. So even when Umkomathi was created, so it was a leper, set aside in 1920s, a leprosy colony. Then when leprosy was cured, it became a TB facility. In 1977, it became a provincial reserve under the Transkei government. But the park officials of the time, when they created the reserve, didn't take it out of agricultural department and put it in environment. They left it in agriculture. And we had all these strange regulations which determined agriculture but don't apply in environment. So we had to, the paperwork which we had to go through. So it took so long. And then COVID came along. I mean, we had 3 starts on the build. But in about 2014, the chairman phones me up and he says, listen, these delays, what's going on there? Are you serious, or is this are you just kind of interested and not really interested? And I said to him, his name was Chairman Kalaba. I said, Chairman, I will not let you down. And it was that promise to the chairman, and at that stage, a brilliant bunch of board members, trustees. They were just such a great bunch of people who really wanted to do good for their people. And I made him that promise. And I said, I'm not going to let you down. So come hell or high water, through all the thick and thins, we managed to pull it off.
Wow, amazing, Colin. Look, just touching again on my experience getting in there, something I had to digest after this stay was really what makes it so special, because whilst there's some obvious stuff, the beauty and the lodge you've created, there was something more. And the way I thought about it, we'll often have people who will get hold of us and say, look, we need to do something special. We never see our family, and we've got to spoil them. So I would love to go and do something experiential, but I've got to go somewhere, let's say fancy, where the thread count is right and what have you. And I thought GweGwe is a place where you can go, just sit in your room, look out across the ocean, the beach, and sip on cocktails if you want to next to your beautiful pool, and enjoying real kind of barefoot luxury. Maybe you can better describe it. It's quite opulent in its beach way. But if you want to go out and absolutely muck it, I mean, I don't think we were at those waterfalls, lost the watch, and to tell everybody we had jumped in. I lost my watch, Apple Watch. I just got it. I was grumpy. I'd lost a tooth. And our guide, Asunda, said to me the next day, it was raining, and he said, we're going to go find it. And I cheered up a bit, and I thought, well, we're never going to find this, but it'll be a bit of fun. Something I don't know if many people know, but it was the first time I've ever worn a wetsuit. I've come to surf here where I am, but I never wear a wetsuit. And one of my young daughters, was with me and said I looked like Fester Adams. And that was quite an experience. But as Sunday got in there 6 minutes later, he had found my watch and another one, which was really incredible. And then we continued. There was the freshwater eel that we saw in the top rock pool, or one of the top rock pools. And then there were the turtles down at the bottom. There were dolphins. I mean, the waterfalls coming down to the sea. It's really an extraordinary piece of land. And what made you choose where the lodges? Were there different choices? How did that process happen with where you placed the lodge?
So we had no choice. It was part of the contract. And the key thing is that there was a lodge there. It was from even before 1977, there were rondavels there, and that became like the holiday center for the folks at the leprosy colony. So there's been something there, and that is crucial. Our contract said we had to develop in 2 areas. It said we had to develop at GweGwe, then at North Beach. And we felt that developing at North Beach would not leave a beach in a pristine situation. So we had to change the whole contract and also the development zone to incorporate everything at GweGwe. So that alone took about a year to change the whole process to make sure that we could develop everything at GweGwe. But we feel that that was crucial to leave the whole of North Beach completely undeveloped forever, and do all the development in one spot. And the key thing is, and everybody says, well, how can you build so close to the ocean? Well, we built on previously disturbed land. That is where the old lodge used to be. All the rondavels were all along there. And when you build on previously disturbed land, then you are in a situation you don't have to worry about the Admiralty rules and all the rest of it. So that was the key thing. That was the place to build. The folks years and years ago, 80 years ago, whatever it is, determined that was the great place to put up a little lodge, which they did, the holiday camp, and they put a second one in the forest, which was Riverside. So previously you could either go and stay at GweGwe on the coast, or literally 70 meters behind, go into Riverside in the forest. And those were in existence, and that is why we had the environmental permissions. I mean, the environmental process, I mean, the EI document is, I mean, it's almost 5 inches thick, because everything from sewage, from water extraction, all this type of stuff, and had to be properly adjudicated and done by environmentalists. But the key thing is previously disturbed land.
Colin, we've touched on more than touched on, we've dug into community and to conservation. On the conservation side, just two things. Firstly, could you tell us a bit about how you would describe the luxury? And then can you tell us about the actual game experience, the wildlife? I believe there's things to come if you are able to highlight that.
So yeah, so the foundation, as we touched on earlier, is this extraordinary area of biodiversity. And 2,200 species, about 200 found nowhere else on the planet. There's one tree where there's one species, one version in the entire planet in a protected area. So we've got a lot of these, like the Pondo palm, which is found on the north bank of these rivers. But there's the Pondo ghost bush, Raspalia. There's one in the reserve, and there's one other little tiny colony just outside, but doesn't have formal protection. So you've got that as an underpinning. Then you've got these extraordinary grasslands, and ultimately, the real kind of litmus test for us is the reintroduction of white rhino. Why? First of all, the carrying capacity for Mkombati is about between 100 and 150 white rhino. We've got a donation pledged of 22 white rhino to come into the reserve when the time is right. And the only time we'll bring them in is when there's broad-based community acceptance of rhino, which means that we've got to have the vast majority of every single family in there getting direct benefits from the reserve. So we've got a whole lot of programs underway to make sure that happens. But whenever we sit down and we start making decisions, we say, okay, what's going to be right in 25 and 50 years' time? This is not a decision for today. This is not for tomorrow, not for my lifetime. It's 25, 50 years' time. What's going to be great? So for us, doubling the size of the reserve, bringing back white rhino, to have those. And the key thing about Mkombati is to be able to, as you said earlier, to go out with a guide and really muck it, and on cycles, kayaks, canoes, sups, walk, hike, climb, canoe, into caves, all this type of stuff. But we can't do that with elephants, big cats, and all the rest of it. But white rhino, you can. You can see them away. You can bicycle around them and stuff like that. So it's not an imminently dangerous animal to have there. We never want to be able to take the feeling of freedom away, where people can just go and do their stuff. So white rhino is the big one. We want to get a lot more biodiversity in there as far as the species. I mean, the eland have been there for the last 70 years. I'm sure we need new genetics inside there. We want to build up all the other sort of plains game species from the area and make that all happen. But yeah, it's every decision is 25, 50 years in advance.
Yeah, that's amazing, Colin. You know, that feeling of freedom, it's what was also unique to me is that when we got there, we thought we'd go off on our own, which is really unique. You can just go off on your own, or you can take the guides. I think I mentioned to you, I saw all the guides' faces sort of drop when I said we'd go off on our own. They love what they do. The team really loves to get stuck in. And I remember asking, I said, look, does anybody actually ask to go off and do this stuff alone? They said, yeah, all of the tour operators on day one. And I was like,
Yeah.
strange. And then on day two, we stuck in with the team having a blast. Colin,
But we had Ron on that one. We had a
yeah,
guest stay 6 weeks. We thought, we thought Mkabatu would be like a 4, 5, 6, 7 nights. We thought that would be average. We had a guest 6 weeks for the first while. So he'd been a regular visitor in the past, so he knew a little bit about it, but he went out with our guides. And then once he really knew everything, and he had mates join him for various parts of that, and they came and went. But he stayed for 6 weeks. And in the end, he knew all the right areas, and he just would pack his stuff in the early morning, head off with the radio, all the rest of it. And that's the kind of thing what you can do there.
it's incredible. I think touching on that one too, for people who are watching and wondering how long you should go for, I would say you do not want to go for less than 3 nights. You'll do what you have to do, but really 4, 5, 6, 7 nights is ideal. I know a lot of people will be thinking, well, isn't that a bit long for a stay? And when it comes to putting packages together, I know it might mean 3 or 4 nights often, but as a guest experience, you want to go and do the waterfall, the waterfall, the waterfall, the waterfall. Then you want to start doing the other stuff. And then at the end of it, you think, wow, I would have loved to have just relaxed in that room and taken in those beautiful views for some time. So I think, 3 to 7 nights really isn't too much. I know a lot of people watching this down the line might be travelers or people putting packages together thinking, can people really stay there? Will there be a lot to do? And I think the message is there's a heck of a lot to do. You listed a lot of them. What about the big one, getting there? Can you tell us about getting there, Colin? That's a big challenge in people's mind, but you guys have figured it out. Will you share with the listeners?
So what we do is we offer choice. First of all, like you can self-drive. Easy. Number two, part of that is that we have an arrangement with Ilios and they chauffeur people in. We also have an arrangement with some of the Amadiba guys. They've got old troopy Prados, and they've got they can drive them in. So generally, we access from the north. We either access from Durban, from Margate, or Port Edward, self-drive, boom, or chauffeur drive. Then we offer a boat from Port Edward, but not for everybody. The boat trip is 75 minutes, and it could be high adventure or it can be sedate. But you're going through the surf at Port Edward and you're launching back through the surf in front of the lodge. And you have the Ponda women there welcoming you in their best possible with hot chocolate, with bloody amarula inside or whatever you want. And remember, GweGwe is all inclusive. Eh? So everybody says, oh, I can't afford this, Brady. But it's everything. Once you're there, besides your spa, all your liquor, but it's a fair use policy. We had some guys who tried to drain the bar, then fair use. Come on, guys, we will just let's get it. But it's all inclusive, all your activities and stuff like that. So the boat trip in is the second option. Helicopter from Margate, fixed wing from Durban, from Joburg, and from East London. But we put on a schedule starting on the 1st of September. Every Monday and every Friday we're flying. And you can fly in. It's 50 minutes from Virginia Airport in Durban, boom, and you're in. So you can, if you live in Cape Town, you can hop on the 6 o'clock flight. You arrive there 8 at King Shaka, and then half an hour later you're on a plane, and in you go. But we have a scheduled Monday and Friday, which means that you can go 3 nights, 4 nights, or 7 nights. So we try and give choice. 1st of September.
Wow, that's amazing. Colin, you can't share any pricing yet, I
Yes,
guess.
that's
Yeah.
4,990 per person, minimum 2 one way.
Brilliant. Brilliant. It's very similar to flying into Madikwe, if you're on a FedAir flight tour. So
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, I think that's going to be a big game changer. Something else which I think a lot of people will be excited about and disappointed, but it is happening. The N2 you mentioned is just 14 kilometers inland. We timed it from GweGwe. I think it'll be a big game changer because then even people flying into Durbs have got such a quick route down there. That's really going to be a big game changer for you guys. And it's I think people had said finish this year, but maybe 2027 next year. But that's going to be a big one for you, eh?
Huge, huge. My gut feeling is, they've still got a lot to do. My gut feeling is probably 2028 or 2029.
Okay.
I mean, it's a massive project, that one. And those bridges are huge and stuff like that. But 28, 29. So in the meantime, we just have to factor in the choice: boat, helicopter, fixed wing, drive, off you go. And
Yeah.
from Margate, it's 20 minutes, 15 minutes if the wind's with you. 15-minute to 20-minute flight from Margate, and there's a semi-air flight into Margate, boom, and you're in the lodge.
Yeah, I think we've got to share some of those links down below here. Colin, something I wanted to ask you as well, this partnership, conservation and community partnership, it always requires champions, the gardeners, Joe Cloutey, the hunters, and many others are here in the Eastern Cape. You need champions, but is this a model that South Africa itself can draw on, where you've got this partnership between uh, the private and community? Is there something more that the country can learn from tourism here?
It is not only what can learn, it is essential if we're going to get wildlife and conservation. That we've just published a book, which is coming out next. Oh, where is it? Here we go. Sorry, Ron, I'm just running around. So 2018, we did this book, The Last Elephants, which was a Pan-African book of elephants all the way around the country. And we've just done this one now, which is being launched in a couple of weeks' time. And the real story, which prompted this book, is when the last lions, when I was born, there were 450,000 lions, wild lions throughout Africa. Today, there are, give or take, 23,000 wild lions. I'm not counting the canned lions, the lions in cages in South Africa. Wild 23, that's in my lifetime, it's a 95% drop off. 95% of the lions in my lifetime are gone. What are we going to give our grandkids? Because the current system's not working. And when you look at a World Health Organization's map of where the next billion people to be born, vast majority are going to be born in Africa. And we have to, if we're going to give our great-grandkids, even our grandkids, the experiences we have the privilege of enjoying, we have no choice, but we've got to bring communities directly into the boardroom. Mother sustainability has to be in the boardroom, and communities have to be in the boardroom. The days of us saying, oh, I'm just giving you a job, those days are gone. A job is one thing, but a job does not penetrate deeply into the communities. And I think, you look what's happening in Kruger. And it comes down to South Africans not wanting to pay. If I was the CEO of Sandparks, I would immediately put a 10% surcharge on and say that's going into community work. Straight away, 10%. I mean, going on holiday, 10% is not big money. Yes, local communities should be able to come free, kids maybe, this, all the rest of it. But the average, unless we realize that the tourist who's going to enjoy their holidays there have to be the source to fund community conservation. Because without that, without bringing these guys into the boardroom, we will have nothing. And that's the extension of my 95% loss. 95% in my life. I mean, it's horrendous. Where is it going? And the reason why up to now we haven't had communities in the boardroom at a meaningful scale. And that has to change.
Colin, I think we should have booked 2 hours. Kay, are you monitoring questions? Is there anything that we haven't covered? I know I've covered quite a lot that I've got in. Any others that you picked up?
I've had a look in the question box and I see that there aren't any that we've left unanswered. But if anyone does have a question, there is a Q&A option where you can submit your questions in the next 5 minutes if there's anything you'd like to know.
Thanks. I see there are people raising their hands, but I'm not seeing the questions. Forgive me, everybody. I'm not Kay was meant to be in control here, but I made a whoopsie. Kay, so you can't see these raised hands. We don't know how to do this. I'm going to click on.
No, I would just say
can
to
I give somebody
everyone.
the ability to talk? Can I try that?
No, so how it works is that anyone who has a question can just go and pop it into the chat box. So if you are someone who is raising your hand, please just go and pop your question into the Q&A box. We've got a comment from Honor saying, no question, but just a big thank you for hosting this great and informative talk.
That's magic. Thanks, Honor. Kay, does this end at 11 hard? Will this just cut off?
No, we've got until 11:15 for anyone. We've got a question from Angus. Angus says, is Colin aware of other operators showing interest on the Wild Coast?
I think great question, Angus. And I think what we see ourselves as a catalyst to, and you know, I keep going back to when we arrived in Botswana in 77. There was almost nothing there. There was a handful of pioneers, PJ Besselink and these kind of characters who were just extraordinary people, but there was no real stuff happening at scale. And once you have one or two operators coming and pushing the bar, we've seen Mgazi being there forever, and they employ, I mean, I think they employ 120 people or something like that. Extraordinary sort of network developing out of there. And we see ourselves as being the first kind of genuine 5-star beach lodge there to go and push that up. But you know, even beach lodge we're kind of questioning, because it's not just a beach, as you say, it's all those different activities. But we see ourselves as the first sort of 5-star. And what you generally find is that you got the Mgazis here, we're going to be here, and we bring all of us, we bring with the rising tide, everybody comes up. And that creates other opportunities, other little B&Bs, other community homestays, all that type of stuff to develop in the rising tide. What we don't want is the sinking tide, where we just go down doom and gloom. And so in every area where we've worked and we've put in stuff which has really got genuine partnerships, Namibia, Botswana, I mean, all the way through to Rwanda, Seychelles, all these operations, when you bring the rising tide upwards and everybody comes in and benefits from that, because you, by making the pie bigger, you make it better for everybody. Up to now, it's been a whole lot of sort of homestays and B&Bs, which are there. They're going to be great. There's one or two nice little lodges, etc., and some of the older hotels. But we need to, as a destination, we all need to come with the rising tide and make space for others to come in. As you say, Asanda gives him a hope. My gut feeling is that either Asanda must in time run our lodge, or he must go and develop his own. And we would welcome that, to bring others up, the rising tide.
Colin, I see I've got another one on WhatsApp here, and it asks where the next frontier is. You mentioned that Namibia and Botswana were frontiers, the Wild Coast is a frontier. Where's the next frontier, if not in South Africa and Africa? For conservation, particularly.
I think, yeah, it's you know, years in 2011, we started a book called Africa's Finest, which was the good, the bad, and the ugly of the tourism industry. And we could only find 50 lodges in the entire Africa, which really passed all the muster. You know, had all they were treating their sewage properly and all the rest. 50. If we had to do the same today, you'd probably find well over 1,000 lodges, because everybody's not everybody, they've still got our pirates, but most people are really part of the solution. And we're seeing areas like the Congo come up. I mean, Chad, I still rate Chad, Zakuma National Park, as the finest wildlife spectacle. And you've got African parks going out and doing all this extraordinary pioneering work around Africa. I think they've got, I don't know, 20 million hectares or something like that. I mean, it's an extraordinary organization run by an ex-Zimbo and in Johannesburg. Peter Fernand and his team have gone into all these areas like Chad, like they've just been into South Sudan, and they've discovered the biggest single migration terrestrial migration on the planet ever. So these guys are going and doing the conservation work, and behind them, we now need to bring tourism in, because what's been happening, the tourism industry has been, one of its problems is its own success. We, as a tourism industry, have made it so easy for people to get around seamlessly. You can be in London, Paris, Sydney, New York, Beijing, wherever it is, fly, and within 24 hours, you're sitting in the Garden of Eden. And you're watching these extraordinary wildlife things going on. But we're not seeing what's happening in between these Gardens of Edens. And we've got these patches of chaos in between. And then what happens in some areas like the Serengeti, some of you might have seen that extraordinary, horrible scene on the crossing in the Serengeti where something like 300 vehicles just crammed and blocked the wildebeest from coming through. So we've got to start moving people away from these points of congestion. So Ngorongoro Crater, Serengeti, Mara, and all the already the Mara has started to self-police. And the Mara is now getting it right. We've got to get that sort of balance right. And you don't have to go in the peak season. You can move around. But the tourism industry, because it's become so efficient, kind of disguises some of the problems in between. And I think that the African parks and the other sort of conservation groups which go and do the pioneering, it's now up to the next generation who are looking for these places. I mean, I did an interview with Rod Cassidy not so long ago. Rod is up in Central African Republic on Zanga Bay, on the Sanga River. I mean, that has to be the most remote place. He's been there for a decade, and he's pioneered tourism in one of the most extraordinary parts of the world. I mean, to get there, we bitch and moan about getting around Southern Africa. I mean, it's a journey to get to him. So there's these extraordinary places which are desperate for tourism to come in, but a nurturing tourism, which creates jobs, creates money and industry, and creates value. I see Angola as natural selection. I see Angola as our big frontier and our next big initiative, because, I've had 45 years of absolute joy and privilege from the Okavango Delta. And all along, the Delta was safeguarded because Civil War was the finest conservation organization. Jonas Savimbi was the finest conservation guy for the whole of the Okavango Delta because nobody could go in there. It was absolute mayhem. So there was no developers, there were no rice paddies, there were no extractors, there were no frackers, nothing like that. Now, it's open season. We've got all the Chinese and the frackers and this and that all wanting to go in, and there's a very good chance that the headwaters for the Okavango Delta could be compromised. We've got organizations like Steve Boys from the Wild Bird Trust and Okavango Wilderness Project. They're going in, they've done a hell of a lot of work up there. We see that the biggest single threat to the Okavango Delta is Southeast Angola and what could happen. So we've got an application in with the Angolan government to take a Botswana concession, around about 200,000 hectares, and take that and plonk that in the headwaters and create a model which will allow the Angolan government to see value from nature-based tourism. At the moment, they see no value. Their idea of tourism is somebody coming into Luanda for a mining conference or something like that. So that whole Southeast Angola is unbelievably fragile. And with that goes, the Okavango's gone. So those are the kind of projects. And there's lots of space in Africa for young people to go out and do the hard yards.
Colin, just a few comments here. Adrian Gardner and the Mantis team, congratulations on your pioneering venture. We've got Paul Gardner, who's saying he's looking forward to coming up and filming. Angus mentioned it's more careers than jobs that count, as you had said, as many of the more significant lodges and operators can prove. He asked if you think others are buying into the concept that we're talking about. And then one other one here, I think you answered that one, is what is the good news in South African tourism, and what are our main challenges? Maybe we can close with what are our main challenges, and then what's the good news in South African tourism. Maybe we can close there, and you're welcome to add anything if you want, Colin.
Well, I think if we go back to the lion story, I mean, what we've proven in South Africa is rewilding. That it doesn't matter how bad an area has become. And Adrian, and so many of the reserves in South Africa, even Madikwe, Velkofonden, Marikele, Marataba, obviously Shamwari and Brady, Kwandwe, and all this was derelict land. So we have proven here in South Africa that rewilding does work, and it's an absolute prerogative for going forward, because what we can't do is have these islands of paradise, the gardens of Edens, and chaos in between. We have to start repopulating these areas in between. And we can take the South African example. If you talk about South African tourism, I was a board member of South African tourism for 3 years. That was the stint. And it's probably the most frustrating time in my life. You know, the problem with the board is that you don't have direct access. You've got to give policy as opposed to doing things. And tourism is, you've got to be able to, we had the Barmy Army here, and they were going about at Newlands, you know, it's 23 rand to the pound and 23 rand to, and then, oh, it's 24 rand to them. And they'd have piled up these beers, and they were, and I said to South African tourism, take this clip and throw it into the UK market. We'll have them pour it. Oh, no, we have a 5-year plan. It's not on the 5-year plan. So South African tourism, my gut feeling is, because it's a government organization, it's got huge funding, but it's got to abide by government rules. And South African tourism is driven by entrepreneurs. It's driven by relationships. And we must just assume that South African government now and then will help us, but we just got to go and do it ourselves.
Colin, absolutely last one. I've got an old Series 2 Landy parked outside here. And I think, can you tell us, there's some legendary pictures of you in an old Landy. Tell me about this old Landy. Is it at GweGwe or what? What's the story? Where can you tell me about your old Landy, and then we'll wrap it up?
Now, our first vehicle, we had to be, we made the policy, Chris Mack and I, we had the policy that we had to be better than anybody else, but we had no money. So we went and bought Ford Control Land Rovers off an army auction. And for the first time, we could have a fridge in the back of the vehicle. So those were the very first one. And Chris actually found the original vehicle in some scrapyard in Mound about 2 years ago. And it's now in the Wilderness office. They've redone it. It's now the bar in the middle of the office. So that vehicle was a stuffed out old Landy at one of the lodges, which we inherited and rebuilt and stuff like that. Yeah.
Magic. Colin, well, listen, thank you so much for your time. I'm hoping everybody learned a lot. I learned a lot more. We're going to be sharing this. It's going to go online, and we'll be sending it out to folks. And best of luck. We look forward to not only watching the progression, but hopefully playing a tiny part in GweGwe's success.
Ron, thank you for, first of all, carving out some time. I know you're a busy lad. Thanks for coming to visit, and thank you for your support. Much appreciated.
It's a great pleasure. Goodbye, everyone.
Ciao, guys.